there's this kind of undeniable force shaping almost every interaction we have as humans, I think, from like the smallest social thing up to huge historical shifts. It's power.
Right.
It's everywhere. Often working just under the surface, what we say, what we do.
Yeah, exactly. And whether you're actively trying to understand it and you wield it, or you just want to, navigate a world where others definitely are playing that game.
You need to get a handle on it. It seems essential.
Absolutely right. It's that constant undercurrent. Doesn't matter if it's personal stuff, work hierarchies, politics. Power is always a factor.
Okay.
And for this deep dive, we're going straight to the source material that really unpacks these dynamics in a very raw, very direct way.
Okay, what kind of source?
It's a collection of historical principles, anecdotes, basically offering a guide, sometimes frankly a pretty uncomfortable guide.
To what?
To acquiring power, keeping it, defending it.
Right. So think of this like a master class, maybe. Drawn completely from the inside, the examples in these pages.
That's a good way to put it.
And our goal here, for you listening, isn't to say, this is how you should act. Not at all.
Yeah.
It's more about pulling out the core strategies, the principles underneath, and, the cautionary tales. Sometimes pretty brutal ones.
Very much so.
It's about becoming, really well informed on something that's driven people for, ever. Understanding the game.
Right. So you can recognize it when it's being played around you. Or maybe on you.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And be prepared. This stuff, it goes into territory that can feel, manipulative.
Definitely. Deceptive, calculated self-interest. It's all in there.
But the perspective the source takes, it's analytical, right? Objective. It's presenting these forces as they've apparently operated through history.
Yes, exactly. We're going to explore specific laws, specific principles, each one backed up by, pretty compelling historical examples.
To see how these ideas actually played out. In the real world.
Precisely.
Okay, let's really dig into this then. Where does the source material even begin? What's the absolute foundation it lays out for understanding power?
It starts with a really core assertion. Power is constant. It's just inherent in how people interact.
You can't opt out.
Not according to the source, no. It's a game everyone's playing, whether they admit it or even realize it. The preface really sets the stage. It highlights that in any kind of court, maybe a real royal court, maybe today's corporate world.
The modern court, yeah, I like that.
Right. In that setting, being direct, confronting things head on, saying exactly what you mean, often, it's presented as a liability, not the path to power. Indirection. The source really emphasizes mastering indirection, and that involves a whole suite of skills.
Like what?
Things like seduction, charm, subtle deception, outmaneuvering people without them quite realizing how or why the situation just shifted in your favor.
Okay, so the goal is making people want what you want, or bending to your will but without feeling forced.
Exactly. That lack of perceived force is critical. It minimizes resentment. It stops them from actively resisting you later.
Because if they feel manipulated, they're suddenly your enemy.
Right. But if you just think things sort of naturally went your way, they might even help you again down the line.
That's a key insight right there. The influence being invisible is part of the power itself. And it sounds like part of this foundation is also knowing who the players are. The source mentions non-players.
Yes, it points to those people who are often very loud about their virtue, their morals, their piety, their commitment to justice.
Painting themselves as, above the whole power.
Exactly, and the material says look very, very closely at those people, because they're often the most skillful, indirect manipulators of all.
How so?
That outward show of morality can be an incredibly powerful cloak, a disguise.
So, seeming uninterested in power, or even morally against its usual forms, that can be a tactic itself.
Precisely. The argument goes, if the drive for power is universal, then anyone who seems like an exception, well, maybe they're just distracting you.
Trying to hide their own game.
They might resent anyone who shines a light on the very tactics they're using, maybe even unconsciously sometimes, because it strips away that moral cover they built up. They are playing a game just with a highly refined, often hidden technique.
Which leads to, I guess, a really fundamental piece of advice right from the start. The smart approach is to study everyone.
Absolutely. Study their motives, their actions, their patterns, but crucially, the source strongly advises against complete trust.
Really? Trust no one.
Trusting anyone completely, even friends, even loved ones, leaves you vulnerable. That's the message. It's about keeping a certain level of vigilance, understanding everyone has their own interests, their own motivations.
the foundation is power is always there, indirection is key, appearances deceive, and be careful with trust. That seems to lead naturally into a huge theme in the source, controlling perception, the power of appearances, and especially reputation. Law 5 hammers this on, right?
Oh, absolutely. Law 5 is, well, completely unequivocal. Reputation. It's the absolute cornerstone of power.
Cornerstone.
Yeah. With a strong reputation, positive, maybe even intimidating, you can often get what you want before you even lift a finger. People just concede. They comply because they anticipate your strength or your cunning.
And the flip side.
The source warns without that solid reputation, you're incredibly vulnerable. Why?
Attack from all sides.
Because you lack that invisible shield. The advice is incredibly sharp. You have to guard your reputation with your life. Make it unassailable.
And this isn't just defensive, is it? The source suggests an offensive side, too.
Absolutely. It actively advises learning how to destroy your enemies, not through direct fights, but by creating holes in their reputation, planting doubts, spreading damaging stories.
And then what?
Then, as the source puts it, you stand aside and let public opinion hang them. Public judgment is presented as this powerful, often irreversible force.
The historical examples in the source really bring this to life. The story of General Liang. Against Sima, that seems perfect.
It is. Liang was in a really tight spot, maybe 100 men defending the city, Sima marching on him with this huge army.
No way to win directly.
None. So what did he rely on? Entirely on his reputation. His fearsome reputation for being incredibly cunning, totally unpredictable.
So what did he actually do?
He ordered the city gates thrown open, sent his few soldiers to hide it, and then he just calmly sat up on the city wall, playing a lute, seemingly completely unconcerned.
Playing a lute while an army approaching at full.
Exactly, it was pure performance, projecting total confidence that he had some hidden ace up his sleeve. Sima Yi knew Liang's reputation, gets to the city, sees the open gates, sees Liang standing there.
And his mind starts racing.
Right. He couldn't make sense of it. It didn't look like a real defense. The fear of falling into some brilliant trap set by the legendary Triple Liang, it completely overrode the obvious reality of his independence.
Suspicion and fear is paralyzing.
Totally, he ordered a retreat.
He retreated with massive army because of one guy's reputation and a weak performance.
That's the power of it. Liang's past, the perception of his character, it was both his shield and his weapon. It defeated an army without a single blow he struck. His reputation was that.
Incredible. So what about P.T. Barnum? His approach seems different, almost like he embraced controversy.
Barnum's another fascinating case. Shows how reputation can be used defensively, even against rivals who seem more respectable. His rival, Peel, opened a museum, promoted stuff like mesmerism demos as sophisticated, highbrow entertainment.
Right.
Barnum saw everything there, a way to undermine Peel's credibility.
So how did he attack that highbrow reputation?
Barnum staged his own mesmerism show, but instead of presenting it as genuine science, he made it look totally fake. He promised outrageous things, impossible feats, like his mesmerized subject would let him cut off their finger, stuff like that.
So by making his own show seem ridiculous.
He wasn't just competing with Peel, he was subtly attacking the credibility of mesmerism itself, which happened to be a key attraction at Peel's museum.
Okay. By making all mesmerism look like a sham, he hurt Peel's reputation for offering genuine, serious stuff.
Precisely. It was strategic, indirect damage, undermining a rival's legitimacy. The source interprets these examples by saying, look, reputation is incredibly fragile, easily damaged, takes ages to build, you need constant vigilance, and then there's that provocative twist you mentioned earlier. Sometimes, any kind of attention, even negative notoriety, can bring a false power.
Better slandered than ignored.
In certain contexts, yeah. At least on people's radar. Barnum's early career had moments where controversy, even was based on misunderstanding in crowds, got people talking.
That idea, negative attention being better than none. It really goes against conventional wisdom, doesn't it?
It highlights the different kind of logic at play here in this view of power.
Right. And controlling perception isn't just about your past reputation, it's about controlling what people see now, what you're revealing. Which brings us to law 3. Conceal your intentions.
Yeah, this one's fundamental to that whole indirection idea.
Yeah.
It advises keeping people constantly off balance. Never reveal the real purpose behind it.
Right.
Because if people don't know what you're truly aiming for, they can't anticipate your moves. They can't prepare a defense or counter it.
So So instead of being transparent, you create a kind of fog.
Exactly. The suggested mechanism is to actively guide them down the wrong path, create a distraction, envelop them in smoke, like Emperor Selassie did, or establish a false pattern of behavior, which was Jay Gould's thing.
Occupy their attention with what they think you're doing.
While your real strategy unfolds somewhere else, unseen.
Why is this supposed to be so effective? What's the reason?
The source argues it's because most people are, well, naturally open books. They find it hard to control what they reveal: words, expressions, actions. They often think being open or honest makes them seem good-natured, trustworthy. But the material presents honesty as often being blunt, even offensive, in social dynamics.
Okay.
And more importantly, being too open makes you completely predictable.
Yeah.
And predictability in the power game. It reduces the respect or the fear others might have of you. You lose that crucial element of surprise.
Predictability makes you vulnerable. Okay, how did Emperor Selassie use this code technique? The source of mechanism.
Right, Emperor Haile Selassie was Ethiopia. He was dealing with this powerful and vicious rival, Vulture, and had a big army. Selassie needed to neutralize him without starting a revolt.
Tricky situation.
There. So he planned to invite Vulture to a grand banquet at the palace, knowing full well that Vulture was extremely suspicious. Vulture totally expected Selassie to try and trap him or kill him at the banquet.
So Selassie knew Vulture expected a trap, and he doesn't do it anyway.
Yes. And he played on Vulture's suspicion. He went out of his way to make Vulture feel safe at the banquet itself. He let Vulture bring way more bodyguards than usual into the palace. He gave Vulture the seat of honor, showered him with compliments. He created this whole scene where Vulture felt totally in control and gave him, I saw this obvious trap coming and I've survived it.
But that wasn't the real plan at all.
No, the banquet was the smoke screen. While Vulture was totally focused on the palace, his guards inside the palace, Selassie's loyal forces, acting on secret orders, were busy blocking all the roads leading out of the capital city.
Oh, wow.
So by the time Vulture leaves the banquet feeling smug and secure, he discovers his escape routes are cut off. His army outside the city is surrounded, completely checkmated, trapped not in the palace like he expected, but by forces he wasn't even thinking about.
Forced to surrender.
Yep. The obvious, elaborate banquet trap concealed the real strategic move happening elsewhere.
That's a stunning example. Using the anticipated action as the distraction. Okay, what about Jay Gould? Establishing a false pattern.
Jay Gould, the notorious 19th century financier. He wanted control of Western Union, the big telegraph company back then. Instead of just launching a hostile takeover right away, he first started a small rival telegraph company, built it up just enough to be annoying.
A nuisance.
Right. Then, just as Western Union was getting fed up, he offered to sell it to them. Western Union, wanting to squash competition, bought him out. He made a profit.
Okay, profit but not control yet.
Right. Then, he did it again, started another small rival company, made it just disruptive enough, and again, offered to sell it to Western Union, who bought it out again.
So you did this twice.
Exactly. By doing this repeatedly, he established a pattern. The Western Union directors started to see him as predictable. This amusement guy, whose game was to start companies and get bought out for quick cash.
They thought they understood.
Totally. They felt they could handle it easily, just write a check.
In the third time.
The third time, when they were relaxed, fully expecting the same pattern and anticipating another buyout offer, they launched his real attack. A hostile takeover bid for Western Union itself.
Caught them completely off guard.
Because their expectations, based on the false pattern he carefully built, blinded them to his actual, much bigger ambition. The pattern was powerful deception. It hid his intention to control, not just profit from.
Wow. These examples really show how hiding intentions, misdirection, and false patterns is presented as a deeply strategic way of getting what you want, keeping opponents guessing until it's too late for them to react. And this control over what is revealed, it extends to just how you communicate, which brings us to law 4. Always say less than necessary.
Yeah, this is a classic principle. Rooted in the idea that the more words you use, the more common using. Like imposing. Power often is conveyed through being concise, having a bit of mystery.
Like the old saying, empty vessels make a little noise.
Precisely. The mechanism here is that even fairly ordinary, maybe even vague statements can seem profound or original, maybe a bit intimidating if they're delivered briefly, confidently. Makes you seem sphinx-like. Powerful people throughout history, the source argues, have used silence or minimal communication to impress people, project control.
And the reasoning is pretty straightforward. The more you talk, the higher the chance you'll say
Exactly.
So controlling perception isn't just about avoiding damage. It's about actively creating an image, almost like crafting a character for yourself, which leads into Law 25. Recreate yourself.
This law advises against just accepting the roles or identities that society or your background or other people might try to put on you.
Don't fit into their box.
Right. Instead, you should consciously forge a new identity, one that's memorable, maybe even a bit theatrical, something that commands attention. You become the master of your own image.
How do you actually go about doing that?
The mechanism often involves bringing dramatic devices into your public persona, using public gestures strategically, cultivating an air of being, larger than life, creating a persona that's compelling, stands out from the crowd.
Julius Caesar is presented as a prime example of this, isn't he?
Oh, Caesar was a master of managing his public image. He wasn't content being just another general or politician. He meticulously cultivated his look, wearing spectacular, distinctive purple robes, even when there were laws against it.
Really?
Yeah. He was famously vain, especially about going bald, which is apparently why he cherished the right to wear a lonely symbol of victory, sure, but also conveniently hid his receding hairline.
It wasn't just about the clothes, though, was it? His behavior, too.
Absolutely. He used dramatic appearances, showing up unexpectedly, making surprise announcements that stunned people. He was also a masterful orator. Not just what he said, but how he said it. He knew exactly when to pause, build his community, and crucially, when to stop for maximum effect. Leave the audience wanting more.
Always incorporating surprise and drama.
Constantly, to heighten the sense of his uniqueness, his power.
Abraham Lincoln is another example, but his persona felt much more grounded, less obviously theatrical than Caesar.
Lincoln offers a different flavor of this recreation, yeah. In a political world often full of polished aristocratic types, Lincoln consciously adopted and projected the persona of the homespun common country man.
Emphasize his humble roots.
Exactly. Used folksy stories, spoken in a plain, accessible way.
He created a new kind of archetype for the American president, didn't he?
He really did. It was a carefully crafted character, appealed directly to ordinary people in a way that resonated deeply. It wasn't necessarily his entire self, but it was a highly effective public identity. Memorable. Helped him build broad support.
And the playwright, Bertolt Brecht, he used this idea in a really high-stakes situation, testifying before the House Committee on Un-American Activities, McCarthy era.
Brecht was facing potential blacklisting, a very dangerous spot to be in. Many witnesses took an angry stand, or emotional or defiant. Often didn't end well for them.
Right.
Brecht took a totally different approach. He treated the testimony like a performance, a theatrical piece, carefully rehearsed his answers, used ambiguity, pretended to have trouble with the language, famously smoked a cigar during the hearing, knowing the committee chairman, J. Parnell Thomas, liked cigars. It subtly created this bizarre sense of a shared, almost relaxed space, even in that hostile room.
He's sort of charming in a weird way.
Charm means just enough to pose him off balance. He played the role of the slightly bewildered, slightly charming foreigner who wasn't quite getting the accusations while subtly dodging the question.
He got through relatively okay.
Compared to many others, yes. He projected an image that let him survive.
So the interpretation of Law 25 is really critical. It's about developing self-control, cultivating the plasticity of an actor. You project the image or emotion needed for the situation. You don't actually have to feel it inside.
Right. Create a compelling, memorable character. One that stands out, commands attention, and stops others from defining you based on their expectations or your past.
And this idea of not being fixed, it leads right into Law 48, appearing formless.
This principle suggests that, like water, you shouldn't take a fixed form. The goal is to be adaptable, fluid, unpredictable. Why? To stop your enemies from being able to strategize effectively against you.
How does that work in practice?
The mechanism involves moving swiftly, changing direction unexpectedly, denying your opponent anything solid or static to target or plan against. It's about using ambiguity, unpredictability to your advantage, keeping the initiative by constantly shifting. The source even suggests the large, disconnected nature of the monologue can help with this, makes it harder to continue.
What's the thinking behind it? Why is being rigid so dangerous?
Rigidity makes you a predictable person. Simple as that. If you have a fixed strategy, a fixed pattern, a fixed structure, your opponents can study it, find the weaknesses, plan their attack.
The formlessness.
Creates constant tactical surprises. It just wears out opponents trying to figure out what you're doing, where it'll pop up next. It also makes spying on you much harder. There's no fixed routine to observe.
The source uses an interesting comparison. Chess versus Go.
Yes. Chess is presented as the game of, linear direct strategy. You're aiming to capture the king through positional play. Go, on the other hand, is abstract, multidimensional. It values movement, encirclement, more than direct conflict or capturing pieces immediately. The Go player tries to surround and influence territory, often without big clashes into the game.
And the Go approach is seen as more relevant for these indirect power battles.
Exactly. It's about encircling your enemy's brain with mind games, unpredictable moves, constant irritation, wearing them down, influencing the whole board without necessarily having head-to-head fights all the time. It's the strategy of pervasive influence and adaptability.
How is this shown historically? The example of Baron James Rothschild is used.
Baron James Rothschild, yeah. German Jews who set up the French branch of that legendary banking family in Paris. He operated through decades of intense political chaos. The Restoration, Louis Philippe, the 1848 Revolution, Napoleon III's Second Empire. Paris was often tough for foreigners, especially Jews.
So how did he survive, even thrive, on other scales?
Rothschild survived because he refused to tie himself to any one political regime or ideology or social group. He adapted his approach, his alliances, and business dealings seamlessly to whatever the current climate was. Never showed personal hurt, never let sentiment guide his decisions.
He can seem pragmatic, even hypocritical.
Exactly, because his real identity, his source of power, wasn't tied to any specific form, it was his money. And money is inherently formless. It flows wherever there's opportunity.
His power was in his fluidity, not being rooted down.
Precisely. While other rich families, deeply attached to the old aristocracy or certain political factions, got ruined by the changes, Rothschild remained formless, adapted, preserved his power base. The interpretation stresses that this formlessness is a strategic pose for increasing power, not just being flexible for its own sake. It's about being able to adapt to any situation, a crucial skill, the source says, especially as you get older and the world changes fast around you. Rigidity is death in this moment.
We've covered the power foundation, controlling perception, presenting and shifting self. Now let's get into the picture, working with and against other people, the realm of both manipulation and deception, which is presented less as devices, more as tools in this material. Law 12 talks about using selective honesty and generosity.
This principle suggests that, in a world where people kind of expect self-interest, maybe even dishonesty, a single, timely, sincere, or honest gesture can be incredibly powerful.
How so?
It disarms even the most suspicious person, and it can effectively cover up a whole bunch of less than virtuous actions you might have taken. Similarly, a timely gift, given strategically, can work the same way, like a Trojan horse that looks nice, but masks other motives.
So it's about strategically deploying perceived virtue, like a weapon.
Pretty much. The mechanism is use an open-hearted gesture, a moment when you seem transparent or generous, to create a little hole in the armor of the other person's skepticism or defenses. Once their guard is down, maybe they think they've got you figured out, or they feel indebted, then you can proceed with your actual plan, your deception, your manipulation.
Give us some examples. Count Lustig, famous content, was mentioned, right?
Count Lustig, yeah. Famous for trying to sell the Eiffel Tower. He also had this con involving a supposed money duplicating machine. He targeted this naive guy named Waller. When selling him the machine, Lustig didn't just try to rip him off right away. He did a demonstration where he actually duplicated 2 bills using a simple chemical trick. That act of seemingly honest demonstration built massive trust.
And
Then, when talking about the big duplicating machine, Lustig acted reluctant, expressed concern for Loller's financial risk. He pretended to hesitate about selling such a powerful device, acting like he was doing Loller a huge favor or warning him about the dangers.
so that performance of selective honesty, that concern.
Contrasting with the initial transparent demo, it completely disarmed Loller. It seemed too complex, too genuine to be just a simple swindle.
The apparent sincerity made the real deception more convincing.
Exactly. Another example is the master diplomat Talleyrand. As his career went on, he got this reputation maybe deserved for being dishonest, cunning.
Right.
Instead of fighting that reputation, sometimes he just embraced it, used it as a cloak.
How do you use a reputation for dishonesty to your advantage? That sounds tricky.
He would say things to people who knew his reputation for lying, statements that were obviously false, or totally contrary to how he usually acted, like declaring, In business, one ought to show one's hand, which everyone knew Talleyrand never did.
Okay.
By occasionally making these transparently false statements, he made it incredibly hard for anyone to figure out when he was really lying or deceiving them, and when he was just saying something odd as a joke or a distraction. His reputation for dishonesty became a form of misdirection itself, preserved his actual ability to deceive when it really counted.
Incredibly layered. Wow. An interpretation points out that, dishonesty is often expected in power dynamics. Using selective honesty or even strategically using a bad reputation can be powerful tools for manipulation. But there's a crucial reversal.
Right. If your history of deceit is too consistent, too unvaried, then even your moments of genuine honesty might be seen as deeply suspicious.
Law 13 is stark. Really challenges conventional morality directly. Appeal to self-interest, never mercy or gratitude.
This principle is blunt. When you need help from someone, frame your request entirely in terms of how it benefits them.
Not appealing to their kindness, or past favor, or gratitude.
No, don't appeal to their kindness, their past relationship with you, favors you did for them, or any sense of gratitude or justice they might owe you.
Why not?
The reasoning is that people are rarely moved to do something significant just out of abstract ideas of gratitude, mercy, or justice, especially if it costs them something.
Okay.
But they are reliably motivated by necessity, or, even more powerfully, by the potential for personal gain, or avoiding personal loss. Self-interest is presented as a much more reliable and much more powerful lever than emotions like gratitude or mercy, which can be fleeting or conditional.
The story is definitely Plagio and Castruccio Castricani really illustrated at this point.
Castruccio Castricani was a ruthless, successful, and military leader. Stefano di Poggio was an old friend who had actually helped Castruccio a lot in the past. Later on, Castruccio seized control of a town that belonged to Stefano. Stefano, believing their past friendship and Castruccio's sense of justice would matter, went to Castruccio to plead his case.
He appealed to their history. Fair enough.
Exactly. Reminded Castruccio of his past health, appealed to his sense of justice, asked for his town back. Castruccio listened, and then had Stefano immediately executed.
What? Why?
His chilling reason. He said he killed not an old friend, but a new enemy who had become a threat by asking for something Castruccio couldn't give back. The appeal to justice and gratitude backfired catastrophically.
That's a brutal lesson.
It is. The interpretation is crystal clear. Self-interest is the strongest motivator. People might be initially swayed by noble causes or appeals to higher principles, sure. But it's self-interest that provides the solid foundation, that secures the deal, gets their continued support or action. The source ties this back to Law 43, appealing to dreams and fantasies, but notes that even that often works best when you subtly link those noble dreams back to their personal, selfish interests.
This material really isn't pulling punches, does it? Law 15 is maybe one of the most ruthless, crush your enemy.
Totally. This principle is stark. Absolutely. If you have an enemy who is significant enough that you actually fear them, you must seek their complete annihilation.
Complete.
Yes. Leaving even a spark, an ember of their power or influence,
Right.
it just gives them the chance to recover and inevitably seek revenge.
So, no half-measures allowed.
Absolutely not. The reasoning is, you risk far more by stopping halfway, leaving the threat alive, than you do by going for total destruction. The enemy will recover their strength, their will, their allies, and their desire for revenge will be intense. The advice is, crush them, not just physically or politically, but in spirit. Make sure they cannot rise again.
The historical examples really underline this. Fan Tsing's advice to Shannon about Wu Bang.
Right. During the Chuhan contention in ancient China, Fan Tsing was a key advisor to Shang. He recognized Liu Bang, Shang's rival, as extremely dangerous, a capable opponent, an existential threat to Shang's power.
And Fan Tsing repeatedly urged Shang to kill Wu Bang when he had the chance.
He did, but Shang didn't listen.
No. Shang Yu is portrayed as maybe more chivalrous, perhaps arrogant. He showed Wu Bang mercy at least twice at critical moments. He wanted Wu to submit to him, not be destroyed.
Big.
Huge. Both times, Liu Bang escaped Shang's grasp, rebuilt his forces, found allies, and eventually came back to defeat and destroy Shang Yu completely. Fan Tsing's warnings proved tragically right. The other side of that coin is Empress Wu Zixin of China.
Empress Wu, China's only female emperor. She's presented as someone who seemed to understand this principle instinctively. Facing opposition, threats to her power, she acted with extreme ruthlessness. Systematically eliminated anyone she saw as a potential threat, including members of her own family rivals, plotting officials, even her own nieces and sons if they got in the way. Her ability to maintain absolute dominance contributed partly to this willingness to utterly crush any opposition.
So the interpretation is basically, historical figures who hesitated showed mercy to enemies they feared. They often paid the ultimate price, while those who were ruthless in annihilation secured their power, at least for a while. It's a principle purely about keeping power, regardless of the human power.
Exactly. And when you're doing these, well, sometimes unpleasant or controversial actions, you often need to distance yourself from them. Which brings us to using indirect approaches and catch-calls, covered in Law 26 and some related ideas.
Okay, this is about never looking like you're the one responsible for the dirty work, the unpopular decisions, using other people as their mediators.
That's it, exactly. The core mechanism is finding task calls. Yeah, people who do tasks for you, often either unknowingly they think they're acting on their own unconsciously, but in a way that gives you plausible deniability. And crucially, you have to be prepared to get rid of them, discard them, let them take the blame once the job is done, or they become a liability. This team also uses tactics like masquerading as a swine. Another indirect action, where you seem less capable of threatening than you are.
Cao Cao, the military leader from the Three Kingdoms period, he used a supply officer as a cat's-paw, didn't he?
He did. Cao Cao's army was facing a mutiny. Severe supply shortages, a problem Cao Cao himself had caused through strategic mistakes. Facing the immediate threat of his soldiers turning on him, he needed a quick way to deflect their anger.
What did he do?
He called his supply officer, Wang Hao, out in front of the troops, falsely accused him of hoarding supplies, deliberately cheating the soldiers.
And then executed him, right there.
Yes, executed him on the spot as a scapegoat. The soldiers' immediate anger got redirected onto poor Wang Hao. Cao Cao quelled the mutiny, kept his authority, despite being the one responsible for the problem. He used Wang Hao's life to save his own position.
That is brutal and calculated, just as Borgia and Ramiro de Orco is another fantasy example from Machiavelli.
Right. Cesare Borgia inherited this province, Romagna, which was totally lawless, full of fighting factions. To bring order quickly, he appointed Ramiro de Orco, a guy known for absolute ruthlessness, brutality, as his agent. Pretty much. De Orco uses swift, harsh measures, summary executions, severe punishments to brutally restore order, silence all opposition.
So de Orco did the necessary awful work.
Yes, he was the perfect cat's paw for that job. But Borgia knew that while order was restored, de Orco's brutality had created immense fear and hatred among people. So once Romagna was pacified, Borgia needed to distance himself from the atrocities of his name. What did he do? He had de Orco publicly executed in the town square, famously displayed his December body.
Plan all along.
According to the source and Machiavelli, Borgia planned de Orco's scapegoat role from the start. By executing the brutal agent, Borgia achieved several things at once. Showed decisive action, removed the symbol of the recent tyranny, and deflected all the hatred onto de Orco himself. Borgia came out looking just, gained favor with the people, and kept the benefits of the order de Orco imposed.
Cardinal Richelieu also used an indirect approach against monarchs.
Richelieu faced this dangerous plot against him. Involved high-ranking people, including Marshal de Marillac, who was close to the Queen Mother. Richelieu couldn't easily touch Marillac directly because of his connections.
So what did he do?
He targeted Marillac's brother, Michel de Marillac. Michel was innocent of this particular plot, but held a powerful position.
He punished the innocent brother.
Yes. Had Michel arrested and executed on trumped-up charges related to some past administrative stuff, this served multiple purposes. It was a clear, brutal warning to the army and other potential plotters. Richelieu was powerful, ruthless enough to strike even the innocent connected to his enemy. It also indirectly punished the real plotter, the Marshal, by destroying his family. A devastating blow, delivered indirectly because the direct attack was too risky.
Even fables captured this idea, like the crow and the snake.
Right. The crow wanted revenge on a snake that ate its chicks. Couldn't fake the snake directly. So the crow flew to the king's palace, stole a valuable gold chain from the royal women, and deliberately dropped it into the snake's head.
Luring someone else to do the job. Clever.
Exactly. The king's men, looking for the chain, found it in the snake's hole. While getting the chain back, they found and killed the snake. The crow used the king's men as unwitting cat's paws. Got its revenge without any direction.
Super Liang again. He comes up a lot and asks the story of the arrow. Facing a desperate shortage of arrows and accused by a rival commander, Liang was given this impossible task.
Produces 100,000 arrows in a short time, or face No way. So he took boats, covered them with straw dummies, and sailed them towards the enemy fleet on a foggy night.
Using the fog for cover?
Yes. The enemy, hearing sounds in the mist, fearing an attack, just launched volley after volley of arrows into these straw-covered boats.
Aiming at dummies.
Yep. As the fog lifted the next morning, Yang sailed back. His boats were bristling with arrows stuck in the straw, over 100,000 of them. He used the enemy as his unwitting suppliers, his cat's paw, turned their aggression into a resource.
Brilliant. And Mao Zedong against Chiang Kai-shek.
Mao is described as using indirect tactics against the nationalist forces under Chiang Kai-shek during the Chinese Civil War and the war against Japan. First, he essentially let Chiang bear the brunt of the fighting against the invading Japanese.
With the Japanese weaken his main rival.
In effect, yes. Chiang's nationalists were decimated in that fight, while Mao's communists conserved their strength in rural areas. He used the Japanese as kind of cat's-paw against his primary Chinese rival. Second, when the Japanese were finally defeated, the communist forces were positioned to capture huge amounts of Japanese weapons, heavy artillery, air support stuff nationalists lacked. Mao used the outcome of the war and the Japanese military machine itself as another cat's paw to get the resources needed to finally defeat the weakened nationalists in the war that followed.
That's a long-game, macro-level example of using external forces indirectly. And masquerading as flying, that's another facet.
Yes, it's an indirect tactic of self-presentation. The idea is, appear less intelligent, less ambitious, more harmless than you really are, especially when young or in low position, or facing powerful people who might view you as a threat.
Like who?
Figures like Claudius, who faked being physically weak and intellectually dull while becoming the Roman emperor, or Louis XIII of France, who seemed simple and easily managed.
They acted cool to avoid being seen as dangerous.
Precisely. By seeming unthreatening, easily controlled, they disarmed the arrogant, the powerful, those who might have otherwise moved against them. They let them survive, watch, learn, gather strength, unnoticed.
Until the time was right.
Until the opportune moment came to drop the masquerade and strike, catching everyone by surprise because they sent her.
So the interpretation of all these examples is using indirect tactics, scapegoats, cat's paws, appearing harmless to achieve your goals, even difficult or controversial ones, while protecting your own image and power with the direct fallout. It's about getting effects without being seen as the obvious cause.
Moving on, Law 27 digs into playing on people's need to believe, to create cult essentially. This principle explores how powerful it can be to tap into people's fundamental desire to have faith in something, to belong to a cause, follow a charismatic leader who offers a vision.
So it's about leveraging that human yearning for meaning, belonging.
Yes. The source suggests that when strong traditional belief systems fade, where there aren't compelling grand causes around, people are kind of ready for someone to step in and offer them something new to believe in.
How does one do that, according to this?
The mechanism involves crafting a message that's often vague, but full of soaring promise, hope. You emphasize enthusiasm, faith, over cold rationality and logic. You give followers rituals, symbols, ceremonies, things that bind them together, reinforce the belief.
Okay.
And critically, you demand sacrifices from them. Money, time, personal comforts. Because sacrifice deepens commitment. Makes it harder for people to later admit they were following something empty.
We see this with charlatans, cult leaders, even some mainstream figures throughout history.
Absolutely. Figures like Count Cagliostro, the 18th century occultist charlatan, who created these elaborate mystical-sounding rituals, Egyptian masonry called it, used theatrical effects, hidden musicians, special smells, dramatic pronouns, to create an atmosphere that convinced people they were having genuine mystical experiences.
Preying on the desire for secret knowledge, spiritual connection.
Exactly. Another charlatan mentioned, Bari, also done this. Realized the power wasn't just in doing tricks, but in manufacturing visions for his followers, and demanding financial personal sacrifices. That solidified their devotion, gave him power.
And Anton Mesmer, with his animal magnetism.
Mesmer created this whole system around a supposed universal fluid influencing health, which he claimed he could manipulate. His treatments involve these bizarre settings, dimly lit rooms, specific music, magnetized water or rods, group sessions where patients held hands in a circle around a tub of magnetized water.
Creating an environment ripe for suggestion. mass hysteria.
Totally. Tapping into people's desperate need to believe in a miracle cure when normal medicine failed them. In that group setting, suggestibility, emotional contagion, they could be incredibly powerful.
So the interpretation is charlatans, leaders gain power by giving people something they desperately want to believe in, letting them project their hopes onto your system. But the source offers a strong warning here, a reversal.
Right. Playing with people's faith, their emotional needs, especially in groups, is like playing with fire. If they ever see through the facade or their needs aren't met, their disillusionment can turn into intense rage.
So you need constant vigilance. Be ready to bail.
Be ready to abandon your followers and escape before that happens. That's the cynical advice given.
Okay. Law 14 highlights the importance of intelligence gathering. Working as a spy, even while posing as a friend.
The core principle is simple. Knowing about your rivals, their weaknesses, intentions, secrets, is absolutely critical for navigating the power landscape. The best way to get this knowledge? Intelligence gathering. Spies.
But the source suggests something even more effective.
Playing the spy yourself. The mechanism is using social encounters not just for chatting, but as opportunities for artful spying. You do this by asking indirect questions, probing subtly, getting people to reveal their thoughts, weaknesses, intentions, without realizing they're basically being interrogated.
It's about being a good listener, a good observer.
Yes, but actively extracting information. Techniques include paying close attention not just to words, but body language, gestures, unconscious signals. Freud's quote is used, betrayal oozes out of them at every pore. Another technique, power extract. Appear to share a minor secret or piece of gossip first. This often lowers the other person's guard, makes them feel obliged to reciprocate with something juicier.
Joseph Duveen, the famous art dealer, he used this principle with his rich clients.
Duveen made it a standard practice. Thoroughly research potential clients before meeting them, study their backgrounds, art tastes, sure, but also their psychological weaknesses, their insecurities, their vanities.
So he could tailor his pitch perfectly.
Exactly. This intelligence let them know exactly how to flatter, how to appeal to their specific desires, how to exploit their insecurities to close a deal.
But it didn't work on everyone. Henry Ford was an exception mentioned.
The source notes Duveen failed in. Ford,
Who's
despite his
apologizing?
Also, if you do
apparently
talk,
lacked the specific
talk
vanities
with your
or
voice, because if you're whispering and I miss it in the
He
edit,
was straightforward. Didn't have
Right,
that
yeah,
complex
sorry, I was just
psychological
apologizing.
landscape other rich men, like
anything that you do that's a
Nope.
tiny grace,
Mellon was, as the source says,
I
crafty
care
and
more
intelligent,
that I'm not accidentally
implying
missing.
Mellon's own
Oh,
desires
it's
to
gone.
suit made him
Go
more
in
skillful
focus,
player
please.
by being who understood
There we go. Okay, back in focus.
Queen
It's so
Catherine
annoying. Let's
Medici used
do
a
that.
more direct method of spying.
Catherine de Medici established her famous flying squadron. This was a group of her attractive maids of honor, chosen not just for looks, but for intelligence. Catherine assigned these women to subtly
Pull back.
seduce or form close relationships with powerful men
Because
in the French
otherwise-
nobles, military leaders, diplomats,
Sorry.
big figures like Antoine
It's
Marie,
habit.
Navarre, and Condé.
Using charm for intel gathering.
Exactly. These women were effectively her spies. They reported back everything they learned, pillow talk, private conversation, observations, political plans, opinions, weaknesses, secrets. This constant flow of high-level intelligence kept Catherine remarkably well informed, allowed her to anticipate plots, manipulate alliances, keep her power during a really chaotic time in France.
So the interpretation is clear. Gather intelligence relentless. Observe, listen, probe indirectly in social settings. Leverage people's insecurities, their need for validation like Count Lustig saw Loller's naive trust as a weakness. Knowledge is power, spying is how you get it about others.
Shifting slightly, Law 16 offers a principle about presence versus absence. Use absence to increase respect and honor.
This principle suggests we need two present, two available, two visible. It can seem calm, ordinary,
Yes.
less impactful.
Right. Once you've established some level of recognition or status, a temporary withdrawal can strategically fix the respect and honor people have. Absence here creates value through scarcity. Like a desirable item becomes more desirable when supply is low.
How does that work?
The reasoning is, once your image or power is set, stepping back lets people talk about you. Maybe mythologize you a bit. It makes your eventual return more impactful, creates yearning, curiosity. You learn the strategic power of knowing when to leave the stage.
Emperorization provides an example of this too.
After her husband, the emperor, died, Musation was initially forced by custom to retire to a Buddhist convent. Seems to step back from power.
Right.
But even from the convent, she carefully kept her connections, received visits from royal officials and supporters. Her removal from the day-to-day court life, instead of weakening her, seemed to increase from the seat. The yearning for her return grew among her supporters, or those unhappy with the current setup.
Her absence created a space that her supporters could fill with their hopes for her return.
Precisely. That temporary vacuum, the distance from immediate politics, allowed the factions back to consolidate, to orchestrate her powerful return to court, and eventually her rise to the throne. Her strategic withdrawal wasn't abandonment, it was a calculated move that helped her rise by making her presence more desired.
But there's a crucial warning here. A reversal.
Yes, the source stresses this. This law only works after you've already established a significant presence, reputation, or power base. If you withdraw too early, before making a real impression, you won't create your name, you'll just be forgotten.
Gotta build the brand first.
You need that recognizable image or power first, then strategic disappearance becomes a tool.
And related to managing presence, Law 17 advises you should cultivate an air of unpredictability.
This principle plays on a fundamental human truth. You crave predictability in others. You feel comfortable, in control, when you can anticipate how someone will behave. This law says, turn that on its head. Be deliberately unpredictable.
How does that help in terms of power?
The reasoning is, predictability gives others a sense of control over you. They can study your patterns, anticipate your reactions, plan accordingly. Unpredictable behavior does the opposite. Keeps everyone around you off balance.
Waste their energy trying to figure you out.
Exactly. They waste energy, resources, trying to understand or explain your moves. It can be intimidating, even terrorizing, because they just can't figure out what you'll do next. Makes you very hard to count on.
The famous 1972 World Chess Championship match, Bobby Fischer versus Boris Spassky, is used to illustrate this.
Spassky was known for his meticulous preparation. Deeply studied opponents' games, psychological profiles, predicted their moves, weaknesses. Fischer, a genius but also known for being erratic, used this against him. During their championship match, Fischer engaged in a series of unpredictable actions. Made bizarre demands about playing, showed up late, forfeited a game entirely, even made seemingly inexplicable blunders early in some games.
Were those just temper tantrums or strategic?
According to the source, while some might have been genuine eccentricity, they also served as strategic purposes. These unpredictable behaviors threw Spassky completely off his game. He couldn't rely on his careful study of Fischer's past patterns. Fischer was constantly scrambling his script.
Made Spassky anxious, lost focus.
Totally. Became flustered, anxious, lost his focus, ultimately contributing to his defeat.
So the interpretation is, deliberately messing with your own patterns, even if it causes some short-term problems or small losses, is a powerful way to keep opponents guessing. It strips them of their sense of control, forces them to be reactive, uncertain, which is a tactical advantage.
Alright, we hit perception control, dealing with people. Let's move into strategic execution. The principles guiding action and timing. Law 28 is pretty direct. Enter action with boldness.
The core principle here warns against hesitation. If you're unsure about doing something, don't do it at all. But if you do decide to act, commit fully, enter with extreme boldness.
Right. Timidity, the source argues, is way more dangerous than audacity. Mistakes made through boldness. Often easier to correct or cover up with more bold action than mistakes made through hesitation or timid half steps.
What's the reasoning? Psychological, too.
Yes, psychological and strategic. Everyone is drawn to, admires the bold. Timidity inspires neither respect nor fear. Doubts about your plan, others sense them easily. It infects the execution, leads to failure.
Timidity comes from being self-absorbed, worrying too much.
Often, yeah, worrying about perception, failure, paralyzes action. Boldness, on the other hand, is presented as outer directed. Focus on the goal, not internal anxieties.
The story of Vasco Núñez de Balboa in the New World is used here.
Balboa, the Spanish explorer, conquistador, early 16th century. He faced constant political backstabbing, crazy terrain, hostile natives, sent on his own men.
Huge obstacles.
Immense. But despite the uncertainties of exploring the unknown, Balboa consistently acted with extreme boldness and audacity, led expeditions deep into the jungle, faced down rivals decisively, and famously pushed on to discover the Pacific Ocean. Claimed it and all the lands touching it for Spain with this grand, bold gesture.
His audacity inspired his followers.
It did. His willingness to push forward against crazy odds, take risks others wouldn't. It inspired his men, let them seize opportunities. His boldness was absolutely key to his rise in the New World. Though the source does note his inability to moderate that boldness later contributed to his downfall. He failed to gauge the reactions and power of people back in Spain.
So the interpretation, boldness makes you look like you control your own fate, but you have confidence and strength. And it has a practical edge. Bold action creates momentum, can cover up missteps better than timid moves, which just expose your uncertainty.
Following boldness, Law 29. Plan all the way to the end. This is about foresight, vision.
The core principle. The end is everything. Before you even start something, plan backwards from your own goal. Visualize the conclusion.
You need to map out every step required. And crucially, anticipate all the possible obstacles, complications, twists of fate that could pop up along the way.
Why is this planning so important?
The reasoning is, having that clear vision of the end stops you from getting overwhelmed by unexpected stuff that happens mid-process. It's your roadmap. It helps you know when to achieve your goal, when to stop, prevents overreaching, getting lost. Thinking all the way to the end lets you, as much as possible, kind of determine the future by preparing for it.
This brings to mind that idea of not getting swept away by events once things start moving.
Exactly. The interpretation emphasizes that clarity about your ultimate goal right from the start seriously reduces the anxiety and vagueness that are seen as major causes of failure. Shouldn't be tempted by emotional distractions, short-term impulses, improvising once the plan is finished.
Keep your eye on the prize.
See the desired end clearly. Tolerate no deviation from the path towards it. Adjust only when absolutely necessary based on unforeseen things, but always with the end goal in mind. The source uses this analogy of the gods on Mount Olympus, seeing the inevitable tragic ends of human plans, often because humans lack foresight, and quotes Montaigne. In their beginnings, it is we who guide affairs, but so often, once they are set in motion, it is they which guide us. Planning to the end is how you try to keep guiding affairs yourself.
Mastering the timing of your actions is just as critical. Law 35 is about mastering the art of timing.
This principle advises against ever seeming hurry or impatience. Impatience signals a lack of control over yourself, over the situation. Instead, cultivate an air of patience, like you know everything will come to you at just the right moment.
But it's not just about looking patient.
No, beyond personal demeanor, it's about becoming acutely sensitive to the bigger currents of the time. Sensing is like identifying trends that are building momentum, trends that can carry you to power in your mind.
So it's not just waiting, but waiting for the right moment, the opportune moment.
Precisely. The mechanism involves learning when to stand back, be patient, wait when circumstances aren't favorable or ripe for action. And conversely, knowing when the time is absolutely right and conditions are perfect, to strike fiercely and decisively to get what you want.
The story of Juan's advisor in China illustrates the patience part.
Right. The state of Peking was attacked by the powerful state of Qin. Peking appealed to the larger state of Juan for help. Juan's advisor counseled patience, argued that rushing to help Peking immediately, while Qin was strong, would offer Juan less influence, less glory.
What was his reason for waiting? Let them weaken each other.
Exactly. He reasoned that by waiting until Qin and Peking had exhausted themselves fighting, Juan could then swoop in, rescue the weakened Peking, and easily conquer the also weakened Qin.
And Juan did it.
Juan followed the advice, waited. When the time was right, intervened, gained the maximum advantage and glory, became the dominant power.
Pericles, the Athenian statesman, is another example of mastering timing, especially in war.
Pericles was known for his strategic patience, understanding when to fight, when to hold back. During times when Athens' rivals were strong or conditions weren't right for a big war, he reined in the Athenians' often aggressive desire for conquest, showed control, foresight.
But he kept their ambition alive somehow.
Yes, he kept their ambitions focused, maintained momentum by engaging in smaller, winnable battles and strategic moves when the time was right.
He balanced patience with action.
Understood the rhythm of opportunity. Tragically, after Pericles died, less capable leaders, lacking the sense of timing, gave in to Athenian impatience, launched ill-timed, over-ambitious campaigns, ultimately led to Athens' ruin in the Peloponnesian War. They ignored the principle, no one distracted, no one.
So the interpretation stresses mastering timing requires both inner patience, don't rush, and an external sensitivity to trends, circumstances. Align your actions with the forces of the moment. Wait for the current to be in your favor before acting decisively.
Law 41 presents a really unique challenge related to timing and legacy. Avoid stepping into a great man's shoes.
The core principle here is that, well, human perception tends to favor what came first. The original seems better, more authentic, more groundbreaking than whatever follows.
Right. So if you find yourself succeeding a great or famous predecessor, a leader, an artist, even a famous parent, you face a huge challenge. You'll probably have to achieve double what they did or more just to get out from under their shadow and be seen for yourself.
It's hard to seem original when you're constantly compared to a legend.
Very hard. The mechanism suggested is you must actively avoid getting lost in their shadow. Establish your own distinct identity. This might mean consciously changing course from their path, maybe even subtly disparaging or reinterpreting parts of their legacy, shining brightly in your own unique way. You have to define yourself, not let them define you.
Alexander the Great is a classic example of succeeding a great predecessor, his father, Philip the Mountain.
Philip was an incredibly successful, powerful king, transformed Macedon into this dominant military force. Any successor would have lived in his shadow. But Alexander didn't just succeed his father, he immediately aimed to surpass him, establish his own legendary status.
Like invading Persia.
Philip dreamed of conquering the Persian Empire. Alexander actually did it. And on a scale Philip probably couldn't even imagine.
And the story of the Gordian knot symbolizes his approach, doesn't it?
It does. The prophecy said whoever could untie this impossibly complex knot would rule Asia. Instead of painstakingly trying to untie it like everyone expected, Alexander just drew his sword and sliced right over it.
Dramatic, unconventional.
Totally. Symbolized his whole approach, cutting through problems with decisive action, not following expected paths. A clear statement. I'm not following my father, I'm forging a new, bolder path.
Compare that to Louis the Goatherd, succeeding the son of Louis XIV.
Louis XIV was the absolute epitome of greatness. Reigned forever, created this highly centralized grand court at Versailles, totally centered on himself. It drained France's money, sure, but projected this image of absolute power, control, tied directly to his personal charisma, his will.
And Louis XV inherited that system.
He inherited the system, the court, the expectations, and he tried to continue the old forms.
Yes. Tried to keep the elaborate court rituals, the system Louis XIV built. But he lacked his predecessor's force of personality, his vision, his absolute authority. He failed to establish his own distinct identity, or find a new source of power, legitimacy for the monarchy. Just live in the shadow of the past.
Exactly. Trying to replicate a system built around a man couldn't be. This failure to redefine the monarchy, establish his own authority, contributed significantly to its decline under his rule.
The interpretation is powerful. You are your own father. Don't let the forms, habits, legacy of the past, especially a great predecessor, define you. Actively construct your own path, your own identity. The source also warns about becoming complacent after success, mentioning writers like Tennessee Williams, Dostoevsky, who sometimes struggle creatively when not financially secure.
Right. The argument is that compulsion of necessity, that struggle, can be a powerful motivator. Without it, stagnation is a risk if you don't consciously create new challenges.
Okay, let's shift again. Dealing with opposition, but often in ways that avoid direct, costly fights. Law 9 advises winning through your actions, not arguments.
This principle says trying to convince people through direct argument, often counterproductive. It just stirs up resentment and makes people defensive. Because you're basically telling them they're wrong.
So what's more effective?
Demonstration. Showing them the correctness, superiority of your ideas or methods through action. Without having to say a word or get into a debate, demonstrate, don't complicate. That's the idea.
Why does argument fail so often?
The reason is, everyone, admit it or not, believes they're smart, masters of their own opinions. A direct argument feels like an attack on their intelligence, their autonomy, makes them dig in their heels, resist, even if your point is good.
Michelangelo's creation of the David sculpture is a classic example of this.
Right. Michelangelo carved the David from this massive, flawed block of marble others had given up on. After he finished, Florence's mayor, Piero Soderini, came to see it before it was installed. Soderini praised it, but then suggested the nose was too large, needed changing.
How did Michelangelo handle that? Did he argue about artistic vision?
No argument at all. He just agreed, climbed up the scaffolding, took his chisel, and a handful of marble dust he'd hidden in his hand.
Okay.
He pretended to work on the nose, tapped his chisel lightly a few times while letting the marble dust drip down. Then he stepped back, asked Soderini what he thought now. Soderini looked again, declared Michelangelo had improved. It was now perfect.
He won the argument by not arguing, by using suggestion, theater.
Exactly. One over Soderini, not with logic about proportions, but with a simple theatrical action. Let Soderini believe his suggestion was incorporated like a discerning patron. Michelangelo proved his point about the original nose through subtle performance, not debate.
Henry Kissinger used the symbolic action during negotiations too.
During tough negotiations with the Israelis over withdrawing from Sinai territory after the 73 war, Kissinger faced resistance, a hardline stance from some Israeli factions wanting to hold on to territory at great cost. To get his message across more powerfully than just warnings, Kissinger arranged to visit Masada.
Masada, the ancient fortress where Jewish zealots committed mass suicide rather than surrender to the Romans. Highly symbolic.
Precisely. By deliberately visiting this deeply symbolic site, Kissinger's actions send a powerful unspoken message to the Israelis, like, hey, pursuing a course that leads to potential national disaster, even out of principle. This has historical echoes. It was indirect, highly potent persuasion, using the weight of history symbolism to make a point about the consequences of their stance, better than any verbal argument could.
So the interpretation is, demonstrate your ideas indirectly. Through actions, results, but with symbols. Symbols especially carry huge emotional and persuasive power that words often lack. A valuable tool for winning without argument.
Law 36 gives advice on reacting to things you can't get or control, disdaining things you cannot have.
The core principle. Ignore, dismiss, and even show contempt for things you cannot possess or influence. The source argues that acknowledging something you want but can't have, especially publicly, gives you power over you, exposes your weakness, your frustration.
Right. The best revenge often is just to ignore something or someone completely. Treat them as if they're beneath your notice. The reason, showing disinterest, even contempt, makes you look superior, self-possessed. Signals you're not bothered, not affected, which can be incredibly frustrating to those trying to provoke you or those who have what you want. Often a problem or a person who thrives on your reaction will just wither away, consistently ignored, treated with disdain.
Alexander the Great used this principle after beating the Persian king Darius.
After his victory, Darius, weakened but not totally beaten, sent messengers to Alexander, offering a huge amount of treasure, his daughter's hand in marriage, and half the Persian Empire for peace. An incredibly generous offer, even dividing the empire.
And Alexander, wanting the whole empire, disdained it.
Yes, refused to negotiate. Implied Darius' offers were beneath him, didn't dwell on the tempting treasure of the partial empire, just dismissed it, signaled the sights were set on the entire empire and nothing less. By showing disdain for what was offered, he asserted his power, his superiority, not just over Darius, but over the very idea of settling for less than total victory. Treated the offer like it was irrelevant to his real, grander goals.
Pietro Aretino used this in a different way, about his back.
Pietro Aretino, the Renaissance writer, known for his wit, satire, rose to fame through talent, connections, but wasn't aristocratic, sometimes boasted noble ancestry. When his real background, son of a shoemaker, got exposed, potentially devastating socially back
He
then.
didn't deny it, or make excuses.
No, didn't acknowledge the damage it was meant to cause. He embraced it, publicly declared, yes, I'm the son of a shoemaker, but this only proves my extraordinary greatness.
Turning around completely.
Argued that rising so high wit, influence from the absolute bottom, proved far more inherent genius than being born rich. He completely reframed the narrative, turned potential humiliation into proof of his exceptional talent, by treating the scandal with disdain and made the attack powerless.
The interpretation highlights disdain as a potent political, psychological revenge tool. Makes enemies feel insignificant because their attacks, their possessions, don't seem to bother you. But, crucial reversal.
Right. Be careful ignoring small problems or potential threats. Some things need private monitoring. Don't let them grow into serious dangers you can't ignore later. The source mentions princes who initially ignored Caesar Borgia's rise, only to be destroyed when he got too powerful to disdain.
Law 18 offers what seems like counterintuitive advice on defense. Do not build fortresses. Isolation is dangerous.
The core principle, trying to protect yourself, physically or sexually, by building walls and isolating yourself. Ultimately dangerous. Isolation might feel safe, but it cuts you off from vital information about what's happening outside. Makes you an easier target because you're blind and static.
So the mechanism for safety and power is the opposite.
Yes, mingle with people, circulate widely, build alliances, maintain a network, constantly gather intelligence from the world around you. The court, meaning where you engage with others, maneuver, gather info, is presented as far more powerful, more secure than a static fortress.
Edgar Allan Poe's story, The Master of Red Death, is used as a literary example.
In the story, Prince Prospero tries to escape a deadly plague by isolating himself in 1,000 courtiers in this lavish, fortified abbey, seals himself off from the suffering world outside, believing their wealth, their walls will protect them.
But the plague gets in anyway.
Yes, the Red Death, personified, eventually penetrates their defenses, kills them all inside their head. The story works as a metaphor for the futility, the danger of trying to isolate yourself from the world's threats. You might feel safe behind walls, but you're cut off from reality, ultimately vulnerable.
Interpretation. Isolation cuts you off from intelligence and leaves you blind. Power requires connection, movement, active engagement, not passive, defensive retreat. Which is interesting because it contrasts with Law 42, which does advocate for a type of isolation, but aimed at your enemies.
Law 42 is isolating enemies. The principle here is strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. If you can find a central figure of influence, leadership, cohesion for your opponents, removing or isolating that figure is a powerful tactic to dismantle the whole group.
So instead of fighting the whole army, take out the general.
Essentially is the mechanism. Identify the person or entity providing direction, unity, power to your adversary. Focus your efforts on eliminating, removing, and neutralizing that single central figure. Their removal causes followers, allies, dependent parts to scatter, become directionless, lose cohesion, makes the whole opposition much weaker, or collapse entirely.
Cyrus the Great used this strategy.
Cyrus, founder of the Persian Empire, fought against his grandfather, Astyages, king of the Medes. Cyrus understood the Median army's loyalty, effectiveness, was tied directly to their king.
So he targeted the king.
Focused his campaign not just on beating the Median army, but specifically on capturing King Astyages. By successfully targeting and capturing the leader, he caused most of the Median army to lose their will to fight, scatter, allowing him to gain power over the Medes with less bloodshed, less resistance than a prolonged war against their full force would have involved.
The Spanish conquest of the Incas is another clear historical example.
The Spanish conquistadors under Pizarro faced the Incan Empire vastly larger, much bigger army than their small force. But the Spanish quickly realized the Incan political and military structure was highly centralized, deeply loyal to the Salvadoran emperor.
So they targeted the emperor, Atahualpa.
Yes. Despite being hugely outnumbered, the Spanish ambushed the Incan entourage, captured Emperor Atahualpa, correctly calculated that removing the central figure would make the whole system unravel. With their divine ruler captured, later executed. The Incan forces used to centralize command became fragmented, lost cohesion and will to resist effectively, led to the rapid collapse of the empire despite their numbers.
So the interpretation is
Right.
targeting the source of leadership or unity in an opposing force is often much more effective, more efficient than fighting a whole force directly. But like many things, it's reversal.
Yes, the source warns. Isolating an enemy can be dangerous if that isolated figure still has means to retaliate, build support elsewhere, or if removing them creates a power vacuum filled by something worse.
So sometimes keeping them close is better.
Keeping a powerful enemy isolated but alive, maybe where you can watch them closely, might sometimes be better than letting them operate freely, build new alliances, find new strength outside your immediate control. The example of Andrew Johnson isolating Ulysses S. Grant, who then became a powerful political figure and later president, is mentioned as a cautionary tale. Sometimes, keeping enemies close where you can watch them is the safer bet.
Our final area for this deep dive touches on the practical side of things, the use of money. Well, it's not just one law. The source material, especially around Law 40, talks about how money works in the power game.
The core principle isn't just about getting rich, but about its strategic use. Money, in this context, needs to circulate to generate power. What money truly buys, from this perspective, isn't just stuff, it's power over people, their actions, loyalty, needs.
So hoarding money is less effective than using it strategically.
Absolutely. The mechanism involves using money strategically for calculated generosity, buying influence, funding ventures, creating obligations, rewarding loyalty. Hoarding money, the source argues, just makes you a static burden. Wealth that isn't circulating to influence others is just treasure waiting to be taken. Plus, hoarding is presented as psychologically unattractive, and power dynamics signals fear, stinginess. Doesn't inspire loyalty or admiration.
The source identifies different unhelpful money personalities, right?
Yes, it critiques types like the miser, who hoards out of fear, attracts contempt. The huckster, focused only on price, lacks social grace needed for influence. And the sadist, who uses money for cruel power games, delaying payments, haggling just to torture people. driven by a desire to exert control, inflict discomfort.
These types show flexible, non-strategic approaches to money.
Right. Treating money as an end in itself or a tool for petty control, not a dynamic means to get broader power over people.
The Duchess of Marlborough is used as an example of the sadist in her dealings with the architect Van Gogh.
Duchess Sarah Churchill, yeah. Wife of the Duke of Marlborough, involved in building Blenheim Palace. Despite huge wealth, she notoriously used her money, her position, to torment the architect John Vanbrugh. Over trivial details, contracts, payments, dragged things out, caused him immense frustration, financial strain.
The source suggests it wasn't just about saving money.
No, it was a power game, possibly driven by envy of Vanbrugh's creative talent, his ability to command respect from sources besides wealth.
She used money as a weapon to inflict suffering as her dominance.
Exactly. Her focus on monetary control was symbolic of wanting to dominate everyone involved. This sadistic use of money, focused on petty control, not generating goodwill or broader influence, ultimately made her deeply unpopular.
In contrast, Pietro Aretino, we mentioned before, used money more strategically, despite not having vast wealth initially.
Aretino, often living on the financial edge, understood the principle of circulation. He used whatever money he had, often gifts from patrons, to spend freely on others. Hosted lavish dinners, gave gifts, supported less fortunate artists. By keeping money circulating, using it to create this network of recipients, debtors, he cultivated a powerful circle of influence among nobles and artists.
He used money to buy loyalty, obligation.
Yes. Used his generosity funded by patrons to gain power over people, compensated for his lack of inherited status, and by cultivating many patrons through this network, he avoided being dependent on any single one, gave him a degree of independence, power that a hoarder or a sadist could never achieve.
So the interpretation reinforces. Money is deeply psychologically charged. It's a vessel for social interaction, influence. Use it strategically, create obligation, buy support, expand your network, exert influence over people, rather than just accumulating it for its own sake, which is presented as a less effective path to real power in the long run.
And there you have it. That's a deep dive into a challenging, sometimes, disturbing, but undeniably insightful perspective on power, drawn directly from the strategies, the historical examples presented in this source material.
We've spent time unpacking this idea of power as this ever-present game, often played through indirection. We've explored the critical importance of controlling perception, guarding reputation fiercely, while being willing to damage others, concealing intentions behind smoke screens or false patterns, mastering the art of saying less, crafting and recreating a compelling personal image, appearing formless, adaptable.
We delved into the dynamics of working with and against others, the strategic use of selective honesty, generosity to disarm, the absolute necessity, according to the source, of appealing to self-interest over fleeting things like mercy or gratitude, the brutal counsel to crush feared enemies completely, the utility of indirect approaches, using others as cat's paws, the power found in tapping into people's need to believe, the constant practice of spying, intelligence gathering, and the strategic use of absence and unpredictability.
We looked at the principles of strategic execution too. The vital importance of entering action with boldness. The necessity of planning every move all the way to the end goal. The subtle but critical skill of mastering timing, sensing the right moment, and that specific challenge of stepping out from the shadow of a great predecessor.
And finally, we touched on the strategic use of money, not as a tool, but as a tool, circulated to buy influence, create power over people, understanding the psychology behind ineffective money management.
Understanding these principles, as presented in the source, it offers a really pragmatic lens on human interaction. It's valuable not just for someone who might see power themselves, but maybe even more so for recognizing these dynamics playing out in the world around you.
Yeah.
In your personal relationships at work and public life, it's about being well informed, seeing beneath the surface of what people say, and maybe becoming less susceptible to being manipulated yourself.
This material definitely offers a stark, sometimes uncomfortable view of what has historically worked or seemed to work in getting and keeping power. It forces you to confront aspects of human nature that aren't always, pleasant.
So here's a final thought for you to ponder after this deep dive. Considering how consistently effective these indirect, often manipulative, sometimes ruthless strategies for getting and keeping power seem to have been throughout history, based on these examples, does the very pursuit of power fundamentally demand or even inherently corrupt those who seek it? Does it compel them to adopt these kinds of tactics just to succeed in a competitive world?
Or are these strategies simply neutral tools? reflecting a deeper, perhaps amoral truth about human nature, about the dynamics of interaction that just exist, regardless of who uses them.
That was a wrap for today.
Do you have a plan, or are you just going with what feels right?
Oh, there's a whole story going on here.